All right, well, glad we can be here together, and really excited for what's going on in this church right now. It's been a pleasure. I was just listening to a podcast, listening to other pastors sometimes as I do, and they shared stories about sharing about specific events. And we take, for instance, the Charlie Kirk situation. And if they would share that from the front, and if they would share anything, no matter what it was, we look at COVID, we look at wearing a mask, we look at any of these things, and it doesn't matter what you say, and it doesn't matter what position you take, for somebody you're wrong. You feel that? And they were bemoaning the fact that sometimes you would say one thing or you say something and people disagree with you and they would walk out. And we watched people walk out of our churches left and right over significant events in the community that we disagreed over sometimes. Now, I am not going to talk about them today, so you can relax. Thank you. Somebody thanked me. Yeah, you're welcome. Well, mostly because I want you all to like me still. But I think that there's another reason, is this is the reality of the culture that we live in. We walk away from each other very quickly. We walk away from each other because we disagree, because people make mistakes, they hurt us, something happens, and we go, I'm not going to do that anymore. Sometimes there's actually good reasons to create distance, and we will talk about that a little bit, but right now what we're going to talk about is this idea that we tend to walk away, and I think there's a reason for that, and part of that reason is because the algorithm that you watch every week. You know what an algorithm is? It's the very thing that dictates what you watch when you watch Reels, when you watch YouTube, when you watch all those things. It's geared towards you. It sees what you watch, and it gets more extreme, by the way, as you keep watching it. The average American spends how much screen time per day, you think? 4 hours? 6? You're closer. It's actually 7. 7 hours per day is the average American that we spend on screens. Do you know how per day, so times 7, that's 50 times 4, that's 200 hours a month on the lower end. Do you know how many hours the average church attender, not even American, the average church attender spends in church per month? Nope, 1.6. That is the average attendance of people that actually come to church, 1.6 times per month, for an hour. I have no ability to speak. Our music has no ability to speak through the 200 hours that we spend on our screens. That's the challenge that we're up against in church today. I'm not saying it's all bad things, and I'm not saying that you're even looking at anything that pulls you towards something that is not of the Lord or anything like that. But I have a phone myself. I watch Reels, and I get sucked into them sometimes. Here's the thing, is that I think that there's this idea out there that if we get so ingrained into this idea that whatever we're watching is truth, and you all know that that's not true, right? By the way, your brain does not believe what is true. Your brain believes what is repeated to it. Do you hear? I'm going to say that one more time. Your brain actually believes what is repeated to it over and over again. And so when something is repeated by a specific algorithm or whatever you're watching, when it's repeated over and over again, you will eventually succumb to the belief in that thing, and you will see it as a way of life. This is our culture. And then when you come across somebody who disagrees with you, who has the opposite algorithm, what do? Huh? You unfollow them. Goodbye. I do it all the time. But see here, this is actually a thing. I'm reading a book still called The Anxious Generation. It's about Gen Z and our addiction to technology. And part of the anxiousness actually behind this is that you're actually afraid of a social death, because what we continually do over and over again is it's not just anxiety about looking at a screen, it's an anxiety about being left, a social death. And this often leads, this is why suicide rates are so high, is because we're more afraid of social death than we are physical death sometimes. Because we realize that there is a social need there. This is why Gen Z is actually having a leadership crisis, because the culture surrounding online stuff, if you disagree, if you do something wrong, what do we tend to do? We tend to want to expose it as a culture, not as a church culture, but as a culture. We want to expose them, show them how terrible they are, and we blast it all over the internet. This happens every day. No wonder we're afraid to be ourselves. No wonder we're afraid to make mistakes. And we have to put on a mask, and we have to be actually somebody else, because we have to shelter ourselves from that happening. Do you feel that? We can call it cancel culture, we can call it whatever, and originally that was like the right blame the left, is like, this is about cancel. It's everywhere now. This is the culture that we live in. This is the world that we live in. We walk away from each other and we abandon each other. I want to say this, that, when someone threatens that ultimate truth that you believe in, that algorithm that keeps repeating, they actually become the enemy. And you are we call this thing in church, we call it being discipled. It's a way of learning life, it's a belief system, and you're learning by living with this person. I like the term apprenticeship better. You've either heard that from David or I. And it's this way of learning how to do life. It's a practicality to life, but it's embedded in a deep belief system that you get from your consistent wiring that you get on a daily basis. Am I freaking us out yet? You are being discipled. It's not a question of whether you're being discipled or not, whether you're an apprentice of something. It's just a question of what that is. Okay. That being said, your mind, again, doesn't believe what is true. It believes what is repeated over and over again. Now, I'm going to shift this just for a moment. Do you know why our church is here, specifically? One person laughed. What's that? Because of faith. Yeah, there's some really big things, big ideas why our church is actually here, but the reason we're doing a revisiting process is specifically so that we can get down to the specifics of why Summit is actually here and how we can hone into that. Excuse me. We usually say loving Jesus and loving one another, and what most churches do is they go all these different directions, and they're doing 10,000 things at once, and they actually do nothing, by the way. We don't want to do that here. What we want to do is we want to be very specific and actually be very narrow in what we're doing and all be together, headed in the same direction, headed on the same mission, and that's why we're doing what we're doing. Right now, we're not figuring out exactly what that is, or I'm not going to tell us exactly what that is because I don't know what it is. We're still figuring that out. What we're doing is we're doing the broad strokes, like faith, like whatever it is, why churches exist and why we exist in the first place. And what we've done is we're going back to the beginning of faith, and we're looking at the life of Abraham, and we're going through there and how it relates to not only just us as individuals, but how it relates to us as a church. And so if we do a little recap here, last week we started this, and I called it the prototype of faith, and we went over the beginning of Genesis. If we have that slide up here, maybe. We looked at our prototype of our faith in focusing on Genesis 12. And what I tried to explain last week is doesn't it feel good to be part of a church? I almost took a nosedive right there. Doesn't it feel good to be a part of a church that has a lot of people in it? It feels full right now. Feels good, right? It's not enough. We talked about this in our young adult class this morning, is that the reality is that we're called to be something actually deeper, something bigger. So there's not necessarily transformation as we see 1 hour a week. That's not where transformation actually happens. It happens in a community, and it's going to happen as we continue to develop as a church where we can actually speak into each other's lives and help each other out and heal from the inside out. That's what actual growth looks like. And today, as you can see, that's not quite the right slide I was looking at, but you can tell where we're going. We've started this series on Abraham, and Abraham wanted this human recognition. He wanted meaning. He wanted respect. Those are needs, by the way. And God had a different plan on how to do that than the rest of the world. I ended last week with talking about when we actually see God working is when we start to see people being healed, when addictions are overcome, when families are restored, when relationships are restored, when all these things start to happen, you actually see that God's work is happening. But I want to ask us a question. What if that doesn't happen? What if the addiction remains? What if the cancer stays and the prayers aren't answered? What if the marriage doesn't last? Sometimes unanswered prayers are blessings. Yeah, that's true. Sometimes, and sometimes they're devastating. And you know what the most devastating ones are? Is the ones that are our fault. And we know it. And it seems like sometimes we can't live with the guilt, and we see the guilt that we've caused. And what I want to do in my life when I look back at those times is I actually just want to turn a blind eye to it. I don't actually want to acknowledge that I did those things. And it's terrifying. That's what we want to talk about today. What happens when the healing actually doesn't take place, but what happens when the hurt actually takes place, and sometimes it's from us? Where are we at in this story? Well, Abraham hears God's voice. He leaves his house, takes his belongings, takes his people with him, and they go out headed for the promised land. And then there's this severe famine that comes upon the land, and God didn't do anything about it. He's sitting there starving, and so what does he do? He goes, well, we're going to go down to Egypt. So they go down to Egypt to escape, and then he makes up this potential scenario about God has cursed Abraham with a beautiful wife. Poor Abraham. And he makes up this story in his head, and he goes, well, actually, if they see me and they see you, what they're going to do is they're going to kill me, they're going to take you, and then my life is going to be over. My lineage is going to be over. God's promises actually aren't going to take place in my life because you're beautiful. And he makes all sorts of assumptions, and he does it out of fear. And while God stays silent in this moment, there's actually not a whole lot of indication that Abraham is actually seeking God's voice here either. And sure enough, everybody thinks she's beautiful, and sure enough, what does Abram do? He doesn't run. Someone said he runs. That's a good guess, though. That was Joseph. What's that? He lies. That's right. He goes, oh, this isn't my wife. This is my sister, which is actually kind of true. She was a different time. It's a different time, different area, okay? He lies, and he says, this is actually my sister. And then all these plagues come upon Egypt. Tons of people suffering, and that's where we get our text. And it says, so Pharaoh, when these plagues come up, Pharaoh summoned, we can go to that slide if we want to, there. Next one. This is the last one, I promise. It says, so Pharaoh summoned Abram and accused him sharply, and he says this. He says, what have you done to me? He demanded. And sometimes what we do is we dismiss this too quickly, and we don't actually look at what Abraham's actions have actually done. We move on, and we're like, oh, sucks to be Egypt, right? But the reality is because of what Abram does, is the thrust behind this is that it causes like thousands of people to suffer. No big deal. But remember when God told Abram, maybe not, maybe if you weren't here, but in verse 3 of this same chapter, God told Abram that he would be a blessing and he would bring blessings to all the families of the earth. What happened to that? So Pharaoh takes him, he escorts him out, he gives him all this stuff, by the way, gives him slaves, gives him cattle, camels, all of it, sends him away. There was a company that was asked ChatGPT, what do you fear most about the human race? Ask the computer what it fears about humanity. We're headed towards the Terminator section of this, right? You've heard of this? It asked ChatGPT, what do you fear most about the human race? He says, well, I don't actually experience the emotion of fear, but what is most concerning about the human race is its ability to see what is right and consistently doing wrong. A computer says that to us. So let me ask us something. What would we do? Let's put us back into this situation. Abraham knows what he's done is wrong. I think that's pretty clear. He knew what he was doing was probably wrong, but he did it out of fear. What would you do if you were God? Here's what God should have done. He should have told him that he was a bad person for not listening to him. He should have shamed him on some level. He should have exposed him to Pharaoh, and he should have exposed him to the rest of the world, and this is how he should have gone about it, right? This is how our current culture does it, and this is our initial feeling of what we should do to people, by the way. He should remove the promise from Abraham, and then he should distance himself from Abraham. What does God do instead? He definitely doesn't condone the lie. There's not a comment about it. But he protects Abram. He protects Sarai. There's nothing about God even addressing it and shaming him and being upset with him over this moral failure. He keeps the promise that he had to him. And Abraham ends up leaving richer in Egypt than he ever was before. That's a pretty backwards way of doing things, God. Now, the question at least pops up in my mind is, does God just promote ineptitude? Isn't that where my mind, that's where my mind goes. Isn't that where our mind goes? It's like, why would you reward something over and over again? Abraham keeps messing up, and it's like God blesses him even more. It's a bizarre concept. Completely contrary to where we're at right now. Which begs another question, is why does God continually use people who make a big mess of things over and over again? Why does he use you and me? And I'm speaking maybe more of my own life. Nobody knows you like you know you. And I repeatedly keep messing up, and it's like, why do you keep doing this for me? First off, I have no idea. But I do know that God doesn't abandon us at our lowest moment of mistake, even when we know what we're doing and sometimes it's wrong. And even when we've caused people that we're supposed to be helping, even when we've caused people significant pain in our lives. This one is for Rylan. I saw you here earlier. I listen to a rap artist. His name is Bizzle. Thank you. Do you know Bizzle? Oh, yeah, he does. Okay, somebody else listens to him. And he starts one of his songs, and it's called Anyway. He says, he knew everything you would do before he chose you, and he did it anyway. What? If there isn't a more freeing line than that, and isn't there a more freeing feeling than that, that looking back at my own life is that he actually knew you and he still called you. He knows what you're going to do. He knows the mistakes, and he still wants you. Because sometimes it feels like when we've done something wrong and we're sitting in that moment, it feels like, is everybody in the world just going to leave me the way I am? And he says, no. I feel like it puts a huge amount of pressure on us, and for some reason, God uses people, and he uses this over and over again to actually become a healing to the world, to say that I've actually been there too, and he doesn't let our history go to waste, which is amazing. I don't know how he does it. And we feel the weight, the crushing weight of that guilt, and sometimes it's overwhelming. We look at Abraham's case, and I think God is like this parent that he knows that we're going to fall and stub our knee. He knows we're going to fall on our rear ends. Or in Abraham's case, he knows that we're going to lie and create plagues and suffering for thousands of people. But I think the thing I got from this is that maturing in our faith, it's messy. Sometimes we bleed on people. Sometimes people bleed on us. And what do we do in those moments? When we feel the weight of either what other people have done to us or what we've done, how is it that we actually react to this? This is why Abraham is a prototype to the faith. That's what I said last week. And not the ideal, by the way. A prototype is something that came out first, usually is very faulty. And that's why like with a vehicle, you never want to buy the first generation of the vehicle, right? Because you know that there's something that's going to really mess up, and then you watch the recalls, and you buy the third generation. That's generally where they've worked out a lot of the kinks, or the third year that they come out with a car. And I don't think that we're that far off sometimes in our own spiritual walk, is that we look back at the life of Abraham, we look back at the father of our faith, and we go, well, I probably wouldn't want to live like that. I don't think he's a great model in a lot of ways. Except for this, is that no matter what he's done, and no matter how many times he fails, he continues to cling on to God and won't let him go. That is why he's the father of the faith, or a parent, or the prototype. Now, I would like to say this in a minute. There's this term in the Bible. The whole purpose of your faith walk is to become perfect, right? Why did you laugh? Seriously, we talked about this Thursday night at your house. The purpose of your faith maturity is to become perfect. And I mean that. But I want you to hear what I mean. This is often misquoted, and denominationally, in our Christian denomination, we have, I think, abused this text. But there's this quote where Jesus says, be perfect as your Father in heaven is perfect, or as God is perfect. And a lot of times we look at that and we go, there's no way in the good Lord's name that I'm ever going to live up to that. And so we kind of dismiss it. But the whole purpose is actually for us to mature and to actually look at God as the ideal and look at Jesus as the ideal. And what that means, what perfection actually means, that word is a word in Greek called telos. It literally means to be complete or whole or lacking in nothing. Don't you want that? That sounds much better than perfection, doesn't it? He wants you to be whole and complete. And does anybody know what context Jesus is giving this command? Perfect. He's actually giving it. He gives it in the context of loving your enemy. To be like your heavenly Father and actually to be like God is to love an enemy. I would like to make a clarification, is that you can love somebody and have a distance from them. I'm not talking about a toxic person, but sometimes I think we make that label too quickly, and other times we don't make it quick enough, and I think there's a lot of gray area there, and I'm not saying it's easy. But I think a huge part of the healing process is looking at that and how do we actually love an enemy? I think the first step is to realize that we all started a lot like Abraham. When he is commanded, if he's supposed to be God's person to bring a blessing to all these nations, he ends up bringing these curses. He's acting actually, as we look at it, he's acting as an enemy of God. He's acting the contrary, the opposite of what he's actually supposed to do. And yet God says, I'm still going to love you. I'm still going to walk through you. Now, is that our response as a church when somebody does that? I have been blessed since I've been here as a grace-filled church. As a church that is willing to, that's a conversation Jeff and I had right when they were talking about hiring me. As I was nervous, I said, I'm really young. I'm going to make some pretty big mistakes. And he says, you're going to be safe here. And I thought, I still am scared of that. And here's the thing, is that coming back to it, there's a verse in Romans that says we all actually started out as enemies of God. But what he actually did was he loved us back into existence. And I'm persuaded to my core that there are churches and there are followers of Jesus, and there's ones that actually do it, and there's ones that don't. And I am convinced to my core that the best indicator in my own life, if I'm actually doing that, is there even an openness to loving my enemy? I'm also persuaded to my core that the true church, a true church that actually follows Jesus, will have a boundary with evil. It will. And it will find a way to love its enemies. Because we realize that we were once actually in the same shoes. We were once in that place as well. And God loved us back into existence. He loved us back into his family. And can we do that same thing here? It's pretty quiet out there. It's almost like we've been taught something else from our culture, that we just can't do that. That's not a way of life. And Jesus is teaching us that actually this is the only way forward. This is the only way to peace, and this is the only way to true life. And so I just want to make a challenge for us today. That when we see this and we hear this and we go on and we're tempted to go down the route of we have to expose this, we have to show everything that's wrong, that yes, that happens. But when we're tempted to go down that road, to think about Jesus' words when he asked us to pray for our enemies and to bless those who curse us. He's going the opposite route that he gave the command to Abraham, by the way. He's asking us to do the very thing that our heart inclines, what we don't want to do when someone wounds us, when someone does damage to us. Are we a church and are we people of forgiveness and reconciliation? Whatever that looks like. Again, there's some gray area, and some of those things you need to create distance with. But overall, is that the heart, and is that the initial response that we have when something is done to us, and even when we do things? That's my challenge for us, is when we see things in our culture that are pushing us another direction, making us angry, and we want to expose, we want to shame, we want to do all those things, is there a heart of forgiveness, and do you go to prayer first? That's the question. Let's pray now together for a moment. Jesus, You came here and it says, while we were still sinners or while we were still enemies, you came here and you died. That's not something that I want to do. And I fully admit that. And I would like to give an opportunity for people that want to admit that as well. Lord, forgive us for that. Save us from it. Save us from the culture that continually tells us over and over again that we have to get back at our enemies and an eye for an eye, and we have to take revenge, and we hate our other people. Lord, help us to have a heart that continually cares and does it in a way that you did it. We acknowledge you had some intense words for the religious leaders of the day. But you were also saying to turn the other cheek and to walk 2 miles with someone who asks you walk 1 mile with a controlling Roman Empire over them that was incredibly abusive. And Lord, while we live in a different world than you lived in, there's still this tendency, Lord, to want to fight back, to want to retaliate, and help us to do it in the way that you did. In Jesus' name, amen.